Welcome to Expedition Self on OMTimes Radio with lifelong learner, entrepreneur, and creator of the worlds of Expedition Self, Sam Parrotto. Sam shares 4 decades of studying, guiding, and teaching how to go inside so we can build an incredibly powerful, dynamic, and validating relationship with the self. Expedition Self is laced with stellar, unexpected insights about what it means to be human. Listen now and ignite your self-development process with Sam Parrotto.
Well, welcome and hello to this week on Expedition Self, this Valentine's Day week. I'm Sam Parrotto, and I'm going to be talking about cultivating a compassionate heart today. And it seemed perfect, right, that we should choose a subject that seems to have something to do with Valentine's. So this is going to be a conversation about understanding and generosity and self-awareness. Do you know, I just read that 25 million people have left or changed their jobs in the last 2 years. Like, wow, were we in crisis or what? I think this is one of the things that's indicative of changing times, that we realize at some level that we're unfulfilled doing what we're doing. And for many, they have the freedom to actually do something different. Years ago, there was a gentleman named Scott Dinsmore, and I think he was way ahead of his time when he started talking about how to live your legend. Your life is your legend. I never got to meet him personally, but my friends did, and they said he was so incredibly driven by this idea of finding the work you love and really going for it. I'm going to share his TED Talk on my site. He's no longer with us, but I think you will find it motivating and inspiring. Anyway, so today's show is about cultivating a compassionate heart, and we're certainly going to get to that. But I think this mass exodus that's causing people to change their vocations has something to do with what makes a heart get crusty and inaccessible and dried up and unavailable. When we're unhappy with where we are, when we feel unfulfilled and dissatisfied, how can the heart be all squishy and sponge-like? Yeah, I don't think it can. Anyway, I mentioned I will share Scott's TED Talk, and you can also Google him. So he has given us a lot to think about, and there's other people out there that have too. I guess I'm curious, before I dive in deeper in the show, have you made a job change lately? And did you realize that you didn't like what you were doing? Right. And how did you realize it? I'd love to hear from you today, even though I'm going to be talking about compassionate hearts. And in particular, I'd love to know, what did your heart tell you? What caused you to listen? So this is a call-in show. The number is 202-570-75. Whoops. 202-570-7057. Oh, okay. I just want you to picture right now this bottle of champagne, and I've got my thumb on the cork, and I'm slowly pushing it off, and it goes pop. Pew. This is my 1-year anniversary for the show tomorrow. Last year, on the 17th of February of 2021, I held my first show. And so today is a good day. It's like the best day to call in and help me celebrate this very important, cool milestone of mine. Even if you call in and just say hello, if you'd like, it would make me super duper happy. Like, don't feel like you have to say anything profound. I just would like to just have this little bit of celebratory thing going on. All right. So let's see. Did you catch when I started to describe the heart as squishy and sponge-like and accessible and touchable, in contrast to crusty, inaccessible, stubborn, thick, dense, rough? I want to stop right here and say the heart is supposed to be breathable and movable and contactable. It's gentle and soft and resilient, and it can respond in more than one way. It doesn't have to have rigidity because it's constantly taking life in and taking life out. It beats, right? If you've ever listened to drumming, the tap, 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 right? The bass drum, boom, boom, boom. The rest of the sounds, there's a movement to it that is purely visceral, and it speaks to each and every cell in the body as it goes boom, 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 right? To remind us that the heart is alive. It didn't get to some spot and then just stop. It's in a constant rhythm. And we lose sight of that original space of the heart and what it's actually capable of being. And certainly it's not a light-hearted thing, right? It's not a what do I want to say? A lightweight. That's what I was trying to say there. So this is what you have to get in touch with. The contrast between an accessible heart and one that goes cold and rigid and remote and out of reach. Your heart is in its original form. It's hurtable, it's vulnerable, and it's approachable. So think about this for a moment. Really, really think about it. We talk about our heart health when we go to the doctor, and we check our blood pressure and we get our yearly checkup. But we don't talk often enough about our heart health from the being perspective. We just don't. And I don't think families talk about it as they grow up. My favorite thing to ask people is, how's your heart today? And it's different than how are you? Because it's a reminder to actually check in with your heart and ask it these questions. Am I accessible? Where do I feel crusty? Where am I withholding all that squishy, gentle, touchable part of me? Today's show is about this. Because without having a relationship with your heart that you listen to, that you understand intimately the contrast between feeling and coldness that emanates from there, it's really difficult to cultivate compassion. Where would you cultivate it from? Some idea in your head? I don't know that that's where compassion really lives. I think the head helps it, but I think it happens in the heart. This scanning of the inner self, how many of you do it? Excuse me. Okay, so you start at the mind. I'm going to just kind of walk you through a little bit of this scanning of the inner self. So you start at the mind and notice what's happening there. I look for bees bzz, 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 and busyness. I look for a sense that part of my brain is offline. I look for tension and pressure and whether or not I can feel the breath actually make its way like an easy breeze through and around all the parts of inside my skull. I look for the predominant themes that are at play in the thinking and whether or not I have control of the pace of that thinking. Is it going at a speed I'm actually connected with and whether I can influence that? And then I move to my eyes and I just feel them. I notice if I can soften the sockets in which they sit. Do my eyes feel rested, or are they looking for a place to close and shut out having to see? When I was studying Alexander work, this was a particularly interesting part of the body that gave me a real sense of where I was and how much trying I was doing. So you want to notice whether you are connected to your eyes, looking out of your body, reaching to see, or are you instead attached to the backs of the eyes, and drawing life towards you with your gaze. Settle into the back of the eye socket. Take your awareness and just relax into it. And then allow images to come towards you. After the eyes, I notice my jaw and my mouth and the back of my neck. This part of me is always tight. I'm always working really hard to keep my head on my shoulders. And my throat, it tends to feel tight, and my jaw does too. So again, if I'm going to care about what's happening with my heart, well, then I want to see where my body is in relationship to it. If I'm tight in this area of my body where I express myself, right, out my throat, right, out my voice, then I usually notice that my heart is in some way disconnected from my speaking and the sharing of myself, right? My intensity will localize here. So then I go to my shoulders. Are they lifted, closing in on my ears? Am I slouched forward? Is it easy to stand straight? And when I'm here, the next thing I'll notice is how I am protecting my heart, how I round my shoulders over my heart and try to fold in on myself. And this is when I can notice the crusty factor. Am I locked into whatever is going on? Are my feelings and my emotions, are they actually flowing and in motion, right? Ever shifting. Emotions wrap around the heart. So if they're locked up and sitting in the same place all the time, I think that's a pretty good indication that you're in the crusty zone, right? It's the difference between tissue paper and cardboard. The heart, paying attention to what's happening with it, is one of your best indicators. The best ways to know you're experiencing fully the life you're living, that you're breathing into. I often think of hearts like croissants, layer upon layer of pastry with lots of butter on each one, so that when you bite into it, or really drop into it, as is in the case with the heart, there are a million little pockets and opportunities to have your taste buds go, ooh, or wow, or yummy. We're talking about being that present to yourself that you feel that much. And this self-inventory allows you to notice what's really happening. And you can go all through your whole body, but I'm gonna stop at the heart place so that we can actually talk a little bit more about these crusty factors. So your heart can't be compassionate or capable of giving this gift unless it is in touch with its beat and its aliveness and its malleability. This is probably a great moment to make this point. Sometimes life events, actually probably a lot of times, another person's compassion will actually help us to connect with our hearts. It will remind us that our heart is an accessible and needed part of who we are. That somebody else, because of their compassion, can actually give us this great gift of reconnecting. So as I was pondering today's show, it seemed like the very idea of having a compassionate heart is one of those new superpowers we're going to need. It's not that we haven't needed it forever, but now we're going to need it, not just for us, but so we can keep reminding everyone else in our life that they also have a heart. Think about it. It's a very self-driven cycle, because I know if I fill my circle with people who aren't working with keeping their hearts accessible, whoa, I messed that word up, accessible, it's more likely I'll let mine get crustier. That phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, in my mind, I think of it like it takes a village to keep cultivating a compassionate heart. So the more I can work with this heart of mine, the more I will bring it to others. And that's what I'm really encouraging you to want to take on too. and not just sporadically, but this idea that taking care of your being heart so that you can then cultivate your own compassionate nature. That is a superpower of the next century. That is what we're going to need, right? The superpower of managing heart open, heart accessible, heart in motion requires our fullest attention. I think the other thing I just want to share with you is that, I've been having kind of a challenging time with my son as he's been growing up. And I'd like to just share a little bit about what I noticed over the last 3 or 4 months and what caused me actually to notice it when we come back from break. I'm going to share my story about my son when I come back from break.
A conscious lifestyle for a mindful life. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
OMTimes magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organisation, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Connect at omtimes.com. OMTimes, creating a more conscious lifestyle.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
COVID-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
All right, well, we are back. I'm Sam Parrotto. You are listening to Expedition Self, and we are talking about how to cultivate a compassionate heart. And we have a caller, Denise from Arizona. What would you like to share?
Hello.
Hello.
Well, I can't wait to hear about the journey with your son. I'm loving the whole content today, because that is one of the biggest things I'm working on, is how to better keep my heart open. But I wanted to call and say 1 year. Happy anniversary. That's crazy. I mean, crazy good, but it went fast.
Oh, thank
so
you.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing in it today and always.
You're welcome.
All right. Have a great day.
I can't wait to hear the rest of it. You too. Bye-bye.
So before break, I mentioned that I had been kind of struggling with my son. And, he's 21, almost 22. And I found myself over the last, I want to say, 4 to 5 months, where all of my focus with him has been about trying to get him organized, or help him get on top of his own game, to, commit to things, deliver on his commitments, handle his life in a self-responsible way. And, the quality of our relationship over our life has been that I have very much tried to always work on when I could get focus on it, because we know this is a remember, forget. But, my own stuff, right? That my own stuff comes up, and then how does it have this interplay with him so that I don't, dump on him all the time about my own fears and expectations. Well, I have to say that in the last 4 or 5 months, I didn't realize it, but I want to describe the nature of the quality of the way we were relating is it just became less and less gentle. The sentences were more clipped, the directing, the responses were more reactionary, even though they weren't like blow ups or anything like that. And I realized it because we had a Zoom call meeting and he kept saying, "Hey, I feel like I'm getting disconnected from you and I don't want to. Can we really just talk? Not because I need anything, but just talk." And we got on that call. And the next thing I know, I could cry over this. It was literally like someone just, you know, turned the heat up and it was just started to melt, right? The ice, the angles, the edges, they just literally felt like they were melting away. And all of a sudden I could feel again. And I said it to him. I said, "Oh my gosh, we have been rough with each other lately." And he looked at me, he said, "Yeah." He said, "I think you're right." He said, "Wow, it was easy to lose track." So this brings me to some of the things that cause our heart to get crusty and more unavailable, things that make the heart constrict. So I got a list here, but then I'm going to talk about some of them in more detail. So here's the list: busyness, disappointment, fear, busyness, disappointment, fear, deprivation or lack, resentment, jealousy. Deprivation, resentment, and jealousy. Isolation, loneliness, insensitivity or unconsciousness, and then fielding, projection, and manipulation, which I will talk more about that last one. So the first crusty heart factor is busyness. Last week, I talked about self-importance and how we can get very self-important when we're also very busy. But really, the true cost to us may very well be the impact on the heart. Everything, every action or reaction becomes justifiable. We get caught up in trying to make life go a certain way, and it's the predominant thought pattern. It's all that is driving us. And then somewhere in there, we just forget our own humanity. So truly, I think one of the hardest things about being human is that we can deceive ourselves into believing we're part robot. I mean, at some level, we treat ourselves that way. We can just become this doing mechanism driven by a brain that's putting one step after another, and we just completely disconnect and forget that we're thinking, feeling, sensory beings. This busyness I'm talking about causes us to forget our own humanity. We drive ourselves. We feel like something is driving us, and it gets loaded up with expectations about how we should handle something. And then poof, humanness vanishes. And we forget to check in with our heart. Heck, we forget we even have a heart that it's at play, I think, sometimes. Yeah, this is one of the reasons I always appreciate children. About when they're pushed too hard, they just start resisting or acting out in a way that we would call maybe behavior we'd prefer not to have. I remember one day I was out walking on the sidewalk in Stone Harbor in New Jersey, and my son at the time was about 2, and I like had his hand. The next thing I know, he just laid on the ground, and I said, "Come on, kiddo, we got to get going." He was not going to move 1 inch. He was done. He was done, and any attempt to move him was not met with a smile by a long shot. I know this is so hard on parents when it happens, but it's a big time wake up call. Right? What's happening with the heart? Is it being remembered and considered when we've got a checklist to get through? If we don't remember we have a heart and we don't do that check-in thing with our hearts, compassion will not be available for anyone else. So a big question we might ask ourselves here is, Where am I pushing myself too hard, trying to get too much done? Where am I feeling driven and I don't actually listen to what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling and what I'm experiencing? So the second crusty heart factor, I hope you like that phrase, crusty heart factor. I'm thinking it will help you put a little bit of a lighthearted angle on paying attention to the self, is disappointment. When we get disappointed, for most of us, we have a very tough time really allowing disappointment to be what it is in the body, to feel it, to let it passively sit and seep and roll and meld into things. And that's what disappointment really does feel like, right? It's this like weeping willow of emotional experience. And a lot of times we get disappointed by external things that go on because of life. I mean, really, every day there's hundreds of opportunities. I guess you wouldn't call them opportunities, though. Hundreds of moments, right, where that can happen. How a teacher talks to you, or the big event that doesn't come off, or the vacation you were hoping for, or some breakdown inside of your job, or a moment where you thought you were going to come home and have a family experience and then it didn't go that way. I mean, really, there are so many moments to feel incredibly disappointed in life. And if it's not really honored and validated and worked through and welcomed, most people go, I don't want to feel that, but you got to welcome it. And it's going to be a place that you will become self-protective. And here's the not great part for being compassionate. A lot of times we become bitter and resentful, and we blame others for our disappointment. Uh-oh. Because truth is, it's really hard to come to grips with the idea that we get disappointed with no explanation. I mean, there has to be a reason, right? We can't just live in the world and have no explanation for all this stuff that we're feeling. There needs to be a really good reason, because disappointment is that big. So if we can't find that reason with ourselves, we're going to go find it with somebody else or some other thing that has power over us. When it comes to having compassion, we want to ask ourselves, how can I forgive myself for the events that led me to feeling disappointed? How can I forgive myself for the events and the circumstances that led me to feeling disappointed? Or what do I need to accept about me and life and the others? What do I need to accept about me and my life and other people and other situations so I can allow the fullest experiencing of my disappointment? Now, I'm sure you're over there going, you got to be kidding me. You want me to feel disappointed all the time. But I do really believe that when you give yourself over to feeling disappointment, the heart actually opens and it actually moves faster. And we gain empathy and we feel humility. All good stuff in terms of the development of being human. The third crusty heart factor is fear. Now, I'm interested if anybody's listening and you'd like to call in and just tell me a little bit or share a little bit with all of us about one of these crusty heart factors at play in your life. I would love to hear it. I think it would really add dimension to our conversation today. So this crusty heart factor of fear, it probably needs not as much description as the others. I'm imagining you recognize it all the time in your life. But what we do want to start to realize is that the minute we are afraid, or the background of fear, right? Because there's also this low-grade fear that we can live with. It's the minute our hearts are pretty much going to go into hiding. So when I talk about low-grade fear, that's the stuff that's living in the unconscious that's pushing on you all the time that you may not see. They may be blind spots, right? You know that moment when your friend shows up late and you were worried, and instead of asking, hey, are you okay? You instead scream, where have you been? I thought you were supposed to be here at 8 o'clock. Compassion can only emerge when you recognize what's happening for you and are willing to drop into the fear and find the heart in that moment and give it words. And remember, fear, it is kaleidoscopic. It comes, when you lift up those kaleidoscopes and you look through them, and the colors change, and there's all these little segments and partitions and fragments of color. That's the challenge about fear, is it looks 1,000 different ways. So it's directed at you, it's directed at others, it's directed at the unknown, it's directed at past experiences that didn't get worked through. I mean, fear is just seeping around all of the time. So a great question when you've checked in with your heart and you're feeling crusty is, do I have fear? Is it there? And what am I afraid of? Right? What is it that is showing itself to be afraid? If you can't figure this out, and someone in your life is trying to talk to you about what's happening with them, and you're afraid, I'm giving you kind of another angle on this and why this matters. You're going to try to fix them. You're going to try to redirect them because you don't want to be with your own fear. Why would you want to be with theirs? You're going to push your own agenda for what you think is going on. And in essence, when you're afraid, you can't hear anything but your fear. And so compassion, it's not even in the picture at all. And by the way, when you're afraid, that compassion isn't provided for yourself either. I mean, this is where we often beat the holy bejesus out of ourselves. We critique and we review over and over how we should have done something different, all because we're afraid and trying not to be, trying to avoid it, not in touch with it, not connected. It's important to note here that when we're afraid, we also place a ton of wrong making and judgment on our actions. And just as a little aside, as a little outtake, we also tend to talk to ourselves the same way our parents did when they were scared. And sometimes when people are scared, beside being judgmental and wrong making, they're angry. So it's easy to miss that they are in fact really afraid. I think that when I load all of my consulting work and all my working with people work, of the last 4 decades of working with people, I probably say, I think there's fear here that you're not aware of, more than I say, I don't think you're in your power. And I say, I don't think you're in your power a lot. It just really is one of these things that's always hiding under a rock, that's always trying to avoid being detected. Okay, so that's fear. The fourth crusty heart factor is deprivation and lack. Not having enough, not being enough, feeling lack, feeling, deprived. It makes us so hungry. And we want and we long, and we're consumed with wherever that deprivation occurred, whether it was in the real physical sense of food and shelter and physical safety, or whether it's on that emotional realm of all those core needs. I did a show about this a while back, right? These core needs that we get deprived of having them met. The heart is hurt by this. The entire human experience is diminished in deprivation, and we're often left with deep, deep wounds. The key with compassion is that at an unconscious level, it needs something whole and full, something that's filled up to tap into as a way to provide it. At least I think that's what the psyche, and the more unconscious we are, the unconscious psyche wants us to believe. So in the deprivation or this lack category, it's like we're going to the cupboard but there are no cookies and no bread and no crackers inside. And now we're supposed to provide these cookies and crackers to someone else when we didn't actually have any ourselves. I don't know whether you've ever spent any time thinking about the places where you experience deprivation. You might be in touch with, I don't feel like I'm good enough, or I got enough done. That is a form of lack and deprivation. It's the opposite of abundance. It has a tendency to translate into making us feel stingy, right? And possessive, not wanting to share and give anything away, again, because at some level our core experience was that we were deprived. So the more we weren't able to work through the feelings that went along with that deprivation, the more we'll believe that it's not possible to be compassionate to someone else's experience. And it's even more complex, because the more we feel deprived and then experience duress and difficulty and discomfort as a way to deal with the deprivation or live through it or survive it, well, that's what we'll look for in the other person, if they are to be worthy of our compassion. So we're going to go to break here, but when we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this and talk about this idea of when we decide who is worthy of compassion.
The best of holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. ascendinghearts.com.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour,
if you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind,
walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Okay, we are back. I am Sam Parrotto. You're listening to Expedition Self, and we were talking about how to cultivate a compassionate heart. Before we went to break, I made the comment about how the more difficulty we experience when we're working with our own inner lack or deprivation and what it takes to live through it, the more that becomes the value judgment that we use to decide whether either we or someone else are worthy of our compassion. And I think that this is an important idea, which is everybody in every moment of their lives is worthy of compassion. It does not preclude us from taking action that's needed or talking about how to show up in life in a way that is constructive or builds, on the quality of each person's experience. Compassion does not preclude action. And so this idea, you can just take this one thing from today's show, is go notice where you make some kind of an assessment or evaluation about the worth of providing compassion for yourself or someone else. Along this deprivation thing about where we won't give it to somebody else, it's like, I would maybe talk about how cold it was in the morning when I was walking to school. And what I would hear in response was, I walk 3 miles in the snow to get to school every day. You don't need a ride. You just need to toughen up. Right? Like, I just really wanted someone to feel compassionate that I was cold. I really wasn't, and I could have compassion that you walk 3 miles in the snow because I don't even know what that would feel like, especially growing up in Arizona, right? So we make it difficult on the people around us because it was difficult for us and it feels justified and valid. But really, it's just showing us a lack of compassion. And it doesn't, compassion does not mean that we're going to do things for other people or carry their load necessarily, or you know, I'm going to use this word, coddle somebody who, something, or coddle ourselves, right? Because I don't even like that word, but it does mean that we feel something for our experience, a gentleness or an appreciation for the difficulty of the journey. I think every show I talk about this, that we have to appreciate every single step, every single time a toe hits the ground of our own journeys. And if there's anything to have compassion for, it's every single step along that way. No matter how it played out, no matter what happened in it, no matter who got hurt, no matter what unintended consequence went down, we deserve compassion for every step along our way. So a question you might ask yourself for this deprivation crusty factor category is, where didn't I get enough? Or what did I think I needed more of? And where am I deciding that something or somebody is not worthy of compassion? Okay, so let's go on to the fifth crusty heart factor, is isolation and loneliness. If you think about it, when we're isolated and lonely, there's this human experience that feels like it's lacking in sensory connection. It lacks in love or affection or feedback of any kind, this sense of being alone by ourselves, carrying the weight of life on our shoulders. All of this points to a missing fullness. And like we've said, for most people, compassion is often primarily given from a full place. So the more you're sinking into feeling alone and lonely and isolated, well, it's likely that you have less and less of a connection with the capacity of the heart to actually feel compassion. And perhaps you're thinking, well, yeah, but when I'm lonely, it's a whole heart thing. And I don't know. I think this loneliness does have this heart piece for sure, but it's more of an empty heart. And I kind of wonder if we have a tough time really being in touch with our journey here, really, really appreciating it and acknowledging what it takes to be in our own skin, to be alone in our skin, and to have a capacity to feel lonely, because that's such a huge part of being human, right? This sense that our bodies are separate, that our spirits are separate, that our brains are separate from other people, when really there's the potential to have an experience, a deep experience of oneness with all that is. But when we're feeling lonely and isolated, I don't think we have that oneness. Because compassion is about relating and feeling. And the felt sense of loneliness is deep, and it wraps itself all around our joints, through the nerves of our stomach. So having compassion for what we feel, not just what we've gone through as a set of actions, but actually having compassion for what it feels like to be in our skin. This is where isolation and loneliness may make it hard to feel compassionate for ourselves and others. We tend not to have compassion for what it feels like to feel unless we're wounded and in a justifiable situation where that wound, someone says, oh yeah, that would have pain. So in isolation and loneliness, it's just so important to be able to settle into what that feels like. Otherwise, it remains crusty. A question here might be, how have I appreciated myself when feeling alone and isolated? How can I appreciate the moments in my life when I have felt alone? or just simply felt. All right, the sixth crusty heart factor is insensitivity. By its very meaning, insensitivity is the dealing with the crusty heart, right? It's like this denseness and roughness and lack of true connection with what is happening and the implications of what's happening. It's what is present. The thing about insensitivity is it's often lacking knowledge or wisdom. It's like there's a not knowing and maybe even a righteousness that we don't need to know, right? The insensitivity is a level of unconsciousness that has us not really understand what's happened and why. It's a glossing over. It's a looking past it. It's a turning the corner whilst you're leaving someone behind or some part of you behind. Insensitivity is a superficiality in dealing with the self. I think even about our own lives, we develop a kind of story or interpretation about why we are the way we are or why things go the way they do. And inside of that story, we don't realize it, but we're missing added elements that are essential to truly understanding what actually happened. But we don't know it. And because of it, it translates to an insensitivity that causes the heart to be crusty and compassion to be out of reach. This is a place where I think ownership is so important, because some of what's missing in our stories is this recognition of what we were really thinking at the time, or really needing, or wanting, or pursuing. If we can't really own our experience fully and completely, then we can't really bring the best of our compassion to bear. The more we know and understand, the more compassionate we'll be, because we won't just default, right, to this superficial level of insensitivity as a way to brush things off or work over the top of what's happening inside of us. This insensitivity, when we're on the receiving end of it, it will also play a big role in the compassion we don't offer in return. So you see, these crusty heart factors, they originate inside of us, but then we're on the receiving end of them coming at us. Then that doubles up. Now we close a little more. We get a little more banged up. And then the next thing you know, we're not being compassionate with others in an even bigger way, and it becomes normal. It becomes explainable. It's just the way it is. It's what's happening in the world. Oh, come on. We can't let that happen. We've got to call ourselves to a higher standard. I mean, your freedom and your expression and your transformation, all of that is what will get you the job you want, the business you want, the family you want, the friendships you want, the deep connection in life, the ability to have a balance in your world. I often think about tragic or difficult circumstances that affect all of us. You know, without humbling experiences that thrust us into needing compassion, into seeing places where we've not had it for ourselves, would we ever understand how important empathy and compassion really is, especially if we've been affected by all these crusty factors? So the question for insensitivity is, what more can I understand about this moment? And where do I experience a lack of sensitivity to my total experience in life? Okay, the last and seventh crusty heart factor is fielding, projection, and manipulation. And you know what? We've got a caller. So I'm going to stop right here and I'm going to say, all right, Diane, what do you think about compassion and all these crusty factors?
Well, the one that really got my attention was, and I'm going to turn my my volume down here, was the insensitivity. And I think it warrants a whole session on that. And it got me really going inside listening to you, because I think what happens in my life, my insensitivity shows up when I think that somebody is looking for some input, whether it is help or a hug or a love or whatever it is. And when I respond, I don't get what I think I'm going to get, and I think I turn crusty because it's like, well, I was trying to help you, but obviously it is getting you mad, or it's getting you unhappy, or something like that. So I think I can be insensitive when I turn to somebody and think I'm trying to help them, and I'm not getting in.
I wonder if you're actually the crusty heart factor there is actually rejection. And then you become insensitive, because what I heard you just describe sounded more like you reach out to somebody in some way, right, to assist, and then they don't respond.
Or they respond, but they are mad that I even asked or that I even inquired, but it sounded like they wanted somebody to participate in their feeling at the moment.
Yeah. It's interesting because you picked up on insensitivity, but really what you're describing is that you were being sensitive and then experienced this rejection. And then now it sounds like that's
now I have a crusty heart.
Your heart. Yeah.
Yeah. Now anyway, before I don't have very much time, but I want to say congratulations on your year. And I know you have a wonderful future ahead of you. So I will hang up right now.
Thank you. Thank you for calling and being such a great participant.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, that's awesome. It's great because many of the shows, Diane calls in, and I just feel so lucky that she shares her growth work with all of us. So, all right. So the last one, I'm going to try to get this in before I run out of time. I had a whole bunch of other stuff about what you can do to develop more compassion. So it looks like I might be doing another show on compassion somewhere in the future. But the 7th crusty heart factor is the fielding, projection, and manipulation. So I want you to consider that our psyches have a sense when we're dealing with self-information that isn't on track, or that isn't really syncing up. And we do it with ourselves, and we know when it's coming from others, even if we don't know, we know. So I want to take this idea that I'm lazy. So then I think about all the ways I need to manipulate myself so that I'm not lazy, which includes berating language about what I haven't done. And then when I'll have times when I push myself super hard so I don't have to feel lazy. And then I'll have times when I disappoint myself because I didn't do what I needed to do. So there's this false project about me being lazy. It's an idea, right? And it justifies a whole bunch of responses and actions that I need to take to offset my laziness. My heart is not going to be able to hold up in that. And it's likely that there is no compassion inside of labeling myself. And there's likely very little compassion for anyone else who is unlucky enough to have me label them as lazy. We're constantly taking what's inside and spreading it on others who are on the other side. And when this happens, our hearts have to close to protect ourselves. And when that happens, it's likely that compassion is not going to be in abundant supply. So the question you'd ask yourself here would be, where have I bought into some belief that may not be what's real? And how is that belief being used to push myself around? So in this moment, I want to just say a couple of things. This compassionate thing is a big area of life. It is a superpower. I would really want you to take seriously how to explore this crusty places that get in the way of you being compassionate. I have a very short quote that I want to read real quick from Sharon Salzberg. That is what compassion does. It challenges our assumptions, our sense of self-limitation, worthlessness, of not having a place in the world. As we develop compassion, our hearts open. And along those lines, I want to say that when I started on the radio show a year ago, that OMTimes media and radio and TV, that they gave me this huge opportunity to grow and expand and have an opportunity to talk about what I feel passionate about and believe in. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for giving me a place to do this and for taking such amazing care with me. I also want to say thank you for everyone who has listened, and particularly anyone who has taken the time to call in. Denise, thank you for today, and Diane and some of the other people over the time. I do want this to be a talk show, an active talk show where there's these awesome exchanges about what does it really look like? What does really look like to go inside? And so on that note, thank you for sharing our conversation about compassion today. I definitely will be planning a part 2 to this conversation where I talk about how you can actually cultivate more compassion within your life. And I hope you have an awesome week.